I am so happy. Let's just jump right in. Everyone, it's Thursday, Pack Series. My name is Jessica. I'm the managing director of the Anthem Awards. The Anthem Awards is a new award, property, platform, community to honor purpose and mission-driven work from brands, organizations, and individuals all around the world. We are here every week to talk to amazing people who are working on amazing things to make the world a better place, which we need because literally every day there's something else crazy happening out there. So we appreciate you all so much joining us and for everyone's work with all the things we're working on all around the world. Today, we have an amazing guest. We have Selly Thiam from AfroQueer Podcast. Welcome to the Impact Series.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I'm so happy to be here.
Where are you in the world?
Today I am in Chicago, Illinois.
Great. How is it there?
It's nice. It's warm.
Yeah, we're melting in New York City. We're back again for this week. So everyone stay cool and stay safe out there. So right. Tell us everything. Start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit your story, your background. Tell us about AfroQueer Podcast for folks who don't know.
Sure. So my name is Selly Thiam, and I am actually a journalist. I started out as a journalist. And in 2006, there was an LGBT activist from Freetown, Sierra Leone, who was murdered. My background is I'm Senegalese and American. I grew up in diaspora. And I came out at a very young age. And there was a bit of a disconnect between my queer identity and my African identity. And so when Fanny and Eddie was murdered, it was in the press and in the press here in the United States. And it was the first time I realized that a lot of LGBT organizing was happening in West Africa in particular, where I'm from. So that really sparked me to start an oral history project where I traveled through at first the diaspora and then on the continent to document the stories of LGBT Africans. And before I actually moved to Nairobi and opened my office, we had documented over 400 stories of LGBT Africans from around the world. So it started off as sort of a need to see myself reflected, and then building an archive that then turned into starting a digital media organization in Kenya that would work with LGBT communities to also practice digital media and documentation, because it was important to me that we be remembered and that we be documented. So that's how I started this work. And now 20 years later, wait, am I? No, that was generous. 15 years later, I was like, wait a minute. 15 years later, I run an NGO called None on Record. And I also run a podcast studio called AQ Studios, which produces AfroQueer Podcast and now 2 other podcasts from African and Black experiences. But we're here to talk about AfroQueer Podcast. So I think the way we started podcasting in our office was a bit of kind of just serendipity. One of the team members walked in who's a big podcast enthusiast and was like, we should do a podcast. I don't think anyone knew at the time that that's actually how I started my journalism career as a podcast producer. So I was like, easy, we got this. And we had been, yeah, we could do this, no problem. Yeah. And we had been documenting a lot of stories over the years. So even in terms of that first season, it was a lot of people we had known for, I at least had known for a decade at that point, and was able to now go back and do a deeper dive into those stories and turn it into what would become AfroQueer Podcast, which is a narrative documentary style podcast. So I hope everybody's listening to it. But if you're not, start at season 1. We're now at season 4.
Amazing. I mean, like so many other people who work in advocacy, it often comes from personal experience, right? And just wanting to see themselves reflected in the world. So that's amazing. Thanks for sharing your. Talk to us about what does each season entail? Like, you gave us a little bit of background, but give us a summary of how the seasons are set up.
Right. So we oftentimes go in with the idea that, okay, we're going to do a season of love stories, or, okay, this season we're going to do a season of family stories. I think it's really important to first, before I go into this, talk a little bit about how LGBT stories are represented in mass media. So one of the reasons we started AfroQueer was because we really wanted to sort of crush the myth of like victimhood, of violence, of non-acceptance, of a very sort of one way of telling our stories. And so when we went into the first season, we wanted it to be extremely diverse. So the first episode documents the story of the first Pride March in Africa, which happened in South Africa in the 90s, right at the end of apartheid. It's such an exciting story and such a bit of history. And that was really, really important to us to document at that time. Mm-hmm. Then, the next one of the stories, one of my favorite stories of the entire podcast, I'll try not to say that, but one of my favorite stories of the entire podcast was documenting the story of a Nigerian man who got married here in the United States to his American husband. His pictures were leaked to the Nigerian press, and how that really kind of, challenged his family relationships and what it meant about privacy and what it meant about marriage rights and all these kinds of things. So every season in the beginning was let's just tell a bunch of very interesting stories. Mm-hmm. I think second season, we were like, let's try to do a thing. But anyone who produces any content knows that you had to go in with the best of intentions. So we were
right. Never... Like we have like something in mind.
Yes. And then it just gets completely blown up, or, so we wanted to do a whole season of love, but we could not get enough love stories. It was really actually quite sad. I mean, we know there's tons of love stories, but it's also about people wanting to share their stories on such a public platform, because I think that was probably season 2, season 3. And by then we had a pretty large following. And so there was a diversity of love stories that people were like, no, thanks. I'm not trying to put my business out there, which is fair and smart.
They appreciate that. Yeah. Bit about, how do you source your stories? How do you find subjects and stories to tell?
So we have a great producing team, and we oftentimes sit and producers will pitch. I think for the story that the wedding that broke the Nigerian internet was pitched in a production meeting. The story about Caster Semenya, the South African athlete who, she was being tested for testosterone levels, that was pitched in a meeting. So it's really having a team that is really invested already in the subject matter, who does a lot of reading, who does a lot of research, pays attention, and then comes in with these great ideas. And then we decide, hey, can we make this story work? Is there going to be a story arc? Can we get a good 20 minutes from this? Is this going to tell us anything new? Is there a journey that any of these characters go through? And that's how we decide what we're going to actually do. Yeah, and produce. Yeah.
You had mentioned that you had one that was your favorite. Do you have any episode that you feel like, is really influential over the way you feel, or maybe changed your perspective about something?
Oh, that's an interesting question, because I don't know if I've had one that there was. I think the Caster Semenya story was an interesting one for the team in general, because we had to go into the science of how testosterone changes the body and the ability to compete.
Right.
And honestly, I think in full disclosure, we went back and forth as a team about what we thought, and I think. 1 minute we all thought this, 1 minute we thought this, 1 minute we thought this, 1 minute we thought this. Right. And I think the episode does a very good job of actually presenting as well as we can all of the complexities of what this argument is, and also the transphobia, and also the racism, also the sexism of what's going on with Black athletes, and sex hormone testing and professional sports. So that was a really interesting episode in that way. And I don't know if I still pretty much came in with the same thing that I had. I left with the same ideas when I came in, but it did complicate the way I was thinking about it, which was good. I think it's good to be able to do that and think and change the way you think about things.
Yeah, absolutely. You also mentioned your background in journalism. I think great journalism presents facts, is like very transparent about the fact that it's like we're learning something here. We're uncovering new information, and as we uncover new information, we might change the way we think about something, and that's okay.
Right. But I also think it's really important to be very mindful of the way you communicate your ideas, right? So in the process of researching that story, and for those who don't know, Caster Semenya is a South African athlete who was banned from competing in the Olympics because of high testosterone levels. It was actually ruled that it was unfair for her to compete because she had, more testosterone. And I think naturally occurring testosterone. And I think it was important to us that when we talk about this, even the science of it, even if it seems that, in points episode, we come out on the other side, that we don't do it from a way because a lot of the language around Cast for Submitting has been very racist. You know, it's been very sexist. It's been very transphobic. And that is not, that's something that we want to challenge. It's not like you're going to use this science as some kind of ammunition to attack this person. You see what I'm saying? So that's like the quality of good journalism. You know, you have to shift the rhetoric. You know.
Yeah.
So that's yeah.
Absolutely. You mentioned this a little bit before about representation, but can you talk about that? About why is this representation through podcasting, this particular medium, so important, and how does it really bring hope to the LGBTQ plus community?
That's a great question. We not only make podcasts, we make a lot of documentary films that center African LGBT experiences. Now, you know, our main studio is in Nairobi, Kenya, and Kenya, you know, historically has banned a lot of queer films, with threatening producers and directors and writers of these films with oftentimes jail time, large, you know, fines, etc. And so one of the other reasons why we started this podcast at that time was because we knew there were no real laws, and no one really knew what a podcast was at that time. So it was really easy for us to now move what we might have done in documentary film over to the podcast medium, get the stories produced, distributed, and under the radar of the film classification boards across the continent, that if maybe we're paying attention to us at the time, would have banned us, and we would have been in some really serious trouble. So at this time, you know, and I think it's also really important to note that even in terms of producing something like on your phone and distributing it on, you know, on YouTube, for example, you can still get arrested and you can still get in trouble for doing something like that as well. But podcasting is still in a murky area still. So what it does in some regards, and this is a large part of the work we do at AQ Studios in terms of really training LGBT community members to be able to use audio as a way to tell stories, is that it makes sure that these stories can actually be distributed and can actually get out into the world. Because, you know, it's almost like silencing through bureaucracy in some regards, you know, using the, you know, using the law to really silence an entire, you know, narrative and a population of people. So podcasting in that way has been able to sort of make sure that the stories are being documented, they're being told, they're being distributed. And as podcasting listenership grows on the continent, it means it's getting into people's ears. I mean, that also does mean it will get more scrutiny, but at this time, we're still able to move around and get the stories out into the world.
It's such an important global perspective, because I think sometimes in the US we forget and really take for granted the access to information and different media outlets and content that we have. But in many countries around the world, you don't have access to social media. You can't just say whatever you believe or think and say that publicly and publish that freely on the internet. So much for bringing that up. It's a really important global point, because so many folks around the world are experiencing that reality. Talk about, what is your favorite thing about what you do?
I really love when they hear a story that they love, and then they write us and tell us how much it meant to them, because we also have that experience. Yeah, we have that experience when we finish. We're like, this is such a good story. You know, I think, you know, a lot of times we're making things that we wish that we had when we were younger, we were coming up, like stories that made us feel like we were part of our communities that mean so much to us. And so it's really great to get feedback from the audience that, you know, this helps them to feel seen. You know, it really makes them feel like they're okay. They didn't know that they existed at this time. You know, all these different things that people have written to us. And that is like, that's really my favorite part of being a storyteller, I think, because I know how important that is. You know, so it's really great.
I mean, everyone all around the world from all kinds of different backgrounds and experiences, I'm sure, can point to a movie, a song, or, you know, something.
Absolutely.
Where it's like the first time they really felt like that feels like me reflected in this, you know. So it really important part of people's lives. Tell us what you have planned. What are you working on? What's coming out next in the future?
So we are right now thinking about, we're at AfroQueer season 5, which, wow, okay, that's really exciting. But we're actually thinking about, you know, we're thinking about changing the structure of the show, bringing in new voices to host. I might be saying goodbye to my fam, AfroQueer fam as host, but that's because we have more projects now. So we also just released a podcast from our studio called The Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women. So and it's based off of a longtime blog by two really amazing Ghanaian feminists. It's a very exciting podcast. The team worked really hard on that. So I think people should go and listen to that as soon as possible. Like as soon as it's over, just go subscribe.
Immediately. Just stop it.
Immediately. And just share AfroQueer because it is 4 really fantastic seasons. Really, really well done stories. Share that with as many people as possible and get the word out. And we're now in production on our 3rd show, which is super exciting. And you never know, you might be seeing some of us on, some of it on TV soon. We'll see. Fingers crossed. But we're really working really hard to tell a lot of really fantastic stories.
That's amazing. Tell everyone where they can find out more about you and find all your amazing work and content.
Yeah, go to www. Everyone makes fun of me because I still say www. aqstudios.fm. aqstudios.fm. I said the www for my producer who always makes me edit it out.
It's a website.
Yes. She's like, you don't need to say that anymore. I'm like, oh, okay. But aqstudios.fm. Follow us there. You can follow me here, of course, on Instagram. Follow AfroQueer Podcast on Instagram, AQ Studios. And we have a lot of really cool stuff coming out. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for today. And thank you for all of the work that you do and the stories that you tell for people all around the world.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah.